It was not a panicked call. Not the kind of call where a real victim cries out for help. She called like someone booking an appointment, as if the police were a service that came bundled with a glossy white SUV and a perfectly tailored business dress. That morning the wind was fierce. It whipped through the old pine line, shaking the branches into a long, steady, cold rustle. On the spotless asphalt leading into Ridgecrest Heights, a large wooden sign stood like a fortress, Private Community. The letters were carved deep and painted black, like a declaration of ownership. I arrived early. My old pickup sat tilted at the roadside, dust clinging to its sides like a coat worn by someone who did not belong in this polished world. I leaned against the hood, a cup of cold coffee in my hand, staring at the community gate the way you stare at someone who has just lied and still looks confident. A man in a sheriff's uniform arrived next. His name was Nolan Briggs. He was big, broad-shouldered, but his face had the tired look of someone who had witnessed far too many petty power plays. He did not step out aggressive. He stepped out like someone who was already over it. Right after him, a county vehicle pulled in. A woman got out, carrying a stack of files so thick she had to hold it with both hands. Her name was Paula Soren, the county clerk. No glittering jewelry, no high heels, just a simple hair clip and the eyes of someone who lived by precision. "Mr. Caldwell?" she asked. I nodded. Paula flicked a quick look toward the wooden sign and the black iron gate ahead. "We will do this fast," she said, her voice completely flat, "as long as nobody makes a scene." I had not even answered when I heard tires kiss the edge of the road behind me. A white SUV appeared. It was so clean it looked freshly wiped down with a soft cloth. It stopped at the exact spot where it could see everything: the wooden sign, the gate, me, the sheriff, and the thick file stack in Paula's hands. The door opened slowly, as if whoever stepped out wanted to stretch the moment. Karen Whitmore. She wore her familiar power outfit, a neutral fitted dress, a tailored blazer, a gleaming watch, blonde hair curled neatly, sunglasses covering most of her eyes. She walked forward like she was entering a meeting room where she always sat in the front seat. She did not look at me first. She looked at the sheriff first. "Thank you for coming," Karen said, her voice so sweet it sounded fake. "This man is trespassing on private property. He is filming residents. He is harassing people. We do not feel safe." Sheriff Briggs let out a very quiet breath. He did not react right away. He looked at Karen, then looked at me, like he was watching two people tell two different stories, and he had been pulled into the middle. "I am only here to clarify what is going on," he said. "No one is getting arrested unless it is necessary." Karen tilted her head, the corner of her mouth lifting like she already held the win. "Well, then it is obvious. This is HOA property. The internal roads, the park, the common facilities, all of it. This man is not a resident. He has no right to stand here." I took a sip of my cold coffee and let the silence hang for one beat. Karen hated silence. Silence was the one thing she could not control. "You want me to leave?" I asked, my voice slow. "Yes," Karen said immediately. "Right now." I nodded as if I were considering it. "Then let me ask you this. What exactly am I standing on?" Karen frowned. "The Ridgecrest Heights Road, HOA property." I turned to Paula. "Miss Soren, are we ready to begin?" Paula did not answer right away. She walked up to the sheriff's patrol car and set her stack of files on the hood. The thick paper hit the metal with a dry, heavy sound. She opened the binder and unfolded a large map. The lines were sharp, the county seal bold, the signatures and dates so clear there was no room for argument. Karen looked down at the map. In that instant I saw what she could not hide, the smallest hitch in her breathing. Paula tapped the tip of her pen along a boundary line. "This is the survey map for the Silverpine Ranch parcel," she said, "updated according to the latest ownership record." Karen flicked her hand like she was brushing away a fly. "No one denies he owns the ranch around it, but Ridgecrest Heights is a separate legal entity. We own the roads, we own the common areas. That sign belongs to us too." Paula did not look up. She turned another page. A red outline appeared, wrapping the entire community. She pointed straight to the center. "This land," Paula said, her voice even and firm, was leased under a long-term land lease signed nearly a century ago. Not sold, only leased. Karen laughed, quick and sharp. That is nonsense. Our attorney. That lease, Paula cut in, has expired. The air locked in place. The wind still blew. The leaves still hissed. But everything between us went still. I watched Karen's lips part slightly, then press together, like she was choosing which sentence might save her. Expired? That is impossible, Karen said, her voice a little higher. We own it. We manage it. We have bylaws. Sheriff Briggs looked at Paula. What do you mean expired? Paula pulled out another document and laid it on the map. Under the terms, when the lease ends, the use of the common land reverts to the original owner. The current legal heir is Ethan Caldwell. Karen stared at the name on the paper. My name. It was not a story, not a rumor, not an emotion. Just black ink on white paper, stamped with the county's red seal, and ink does not know fear. No, Karen said, suddenly urgent. You do not understand. Residents bought their homes. They paid fees. Paula looked up for the first time. Her eyes were cold, not cruel, just cold with the kind of reality she worked in every day. Land ownership does not change because of feelings, she said. It changes because of paperwork. Karen snapped her head toward me, like she was reaching for something to cling to. What did you do? She demanded, her eyes flashing. You are trying to destroy this community. I looked at her for a long time. Then I spoke slowly, like placing stones down on the ground one by one. I did not come here to destroy anything, I said. I came here to stand on my land, legally. Karen stepped back once. Very small, but enough for me to know she understood. She understood this was not an argument between a newcomer and an HOA president. This was a crack in the foundation she had been standing on for years. And if that crack was widened in front of the residents, her power would dissolve like smoke. Karen tried to form a smile, but it would not take shape. This is not over, she said, her voice shaking even as she forced it sharp. I will sue. I will. Sheriff Briggs raised a hand, cutting her off. Miss Whitmore, I just need to confirm one thing. He turned to Paula. If Mr. Caldwell is standing here, is that considered trespassing? Paula shook her head. No. Legally, the only person here with absolute rights over the land confirmed today is Mr. Caldwell. Karen froze. I did not add anything. I did not need to. Sometimes the truth speaks for you. Paula closed the binder and clipped it tight, like shutting a door. Sheriff Briggs muttered something under his breath, as if to himself, my God, another HOA mess. Karen turned away and walked fast toward the white SUV. Her posture was stiff, like she was holding herself together so she would not shatter in front of everyone. The car door slammed. The tires spun, gravel snapping against the roadside. The white SUV vanished around the bend. The wind blew harder. The private community sign still stood there. But suddenly, it looked like a lie carved into wood. Sheriff Briggs looked at me, his eyes carrying both exhaustion and warning. I have a feeling, he said. She is not going to let this go. I looked down the road into Ridgecrest Heights. The houses in the distance were tucked behind the pines, beautiful, clean, silent, as if no one knew the ground beneath them had just changed hands. I have the same feeling, I said. Paula stepped closer. You should prepare yourself, she said softly. People who lose power often do stupid things to feel in control again. I nodded. And in that moment I remembered the bright yellow violation notice taped to my ranch gate 3 days earlier. I remembered Karen's eyes when she said the law is the law. I remembered the way she looked at me, like I was something that needed to be corrected. 3 days earlier, I did not even know who the HOA was. 3 days earlier, I thought I had simply inherited a piece of land so wide it would take nearly an hour to drive its boundaries. But it turned out I had inherited something else. I had inherited a lie. And somewhere inside that community, an 82-year-old woman had lost her home because of that lie. I tightened my grip around the cup of coffee and let out a long breath. Because I knew from this moment on, Karen Whitmore would not just send violation notices anymore. She would fight to keep the secret. And if she had already stolen the home of an 82-year-old woman, she was capable of doing far worse. But this time, she picked the wrong person to bully. A bright yellow violation notice was slapped right onto my gate like a slap to the face. I had not even shut off the engine yet, and the words "fine $500" hit my eyes like a sentence. Cheap tape was crossed over 2 corners, and the late afternoon wind slapped the paper so hard it trembled, as if it knew it was posted in the wrong place. I stepped down from my dust-covered pickup, my boots crunching on gravel with a dry, sharp sound. In front of me stood an old wooden gate, rough, weathered, paint scraped away. The same gate my grandfather built plank by plank with his bare hands, back when this place was nothing but open pasture and deer tracks. Behind that gate, Silver Pine Ranch stretched so far that the map on my phone had to be zoomed in and out again and again just to see it all. 1,200 acres. Land wide enough for the wind to replace car horns, wide enough to make every breath feel real again. I stood there for a long time. Not because I was afraid, because my mind was trying to fit together pieces of logic that would not fit. They were fining me for the gate, on my own land, by an HOA I had never signed anything for, never attended a single meeting of, never paid a single fee to. My name is Ethan Caldwell. 3 days earlier, I was still a nameless office worker in the city, swallowed by endless meetings and endless email threads. Every morning I stood in an elevator, watching tired faces reflected in cold stainless steel, knowing nobody would remember my name once the doors closed. And now I was standing at the entrance to my family's ranch, with a violation notice shaking in the wind, and the feeling of being insulted flared up in my chest like a live coal. I bent down and read it again. HOA violation notice. Unapproved structure. They were calling this gate a structure, as if 40 years of my grandfather's memories were nothing more than an illegal construction project, as if someone could tape a piece of paper onto wood and turn it into a crime. "Do you have a problem?" A voice cut in from behind me, cold and sharp like metal. I turned. A spotless white SUV had pulled up along the edge of the asphalt, so clean it looked like it did not belong on this land. The window rolled down slowly, as if the person inside was savoring the moment. The woman behind the wheel was in her 40s, blonde hair curled neatly, sunglasses covering most of her face. But I could still feel the way she looked at me, not like a neighbor, but like an inspector hunting for flaws. She said this area belonged to the Ridgecrest Heights HOA. She said my gate was not on the approved list. She said I had to remove it and pay the fine. I let out a laugh, short and dry, with no humor in it. "You are talking about the gate on my ranch." She tilted her head, her mouth lifting into a thin smile. "Your ranch is not part of this community, and even if it were, the law is the law. The law." That word dropped into the free air of the pine fields like a dirty nail. I looked at her, SUV, at the mirror-glossy paint, at her hand resting on the steering wheel like it belonged on a throne. In that moment, I understood she was used to saying one sentence and watching people bow. I asked what she wanted me to do. She answered like she was reading from a script. "Remove the gate, pay the money, file an approval request if I wanted to rebuild it." She did not ask who I was. She did not ask if I had just moved in. She simply assumed I was some new guy, a soft target, someone who would rush to apologize just to keep the peace. That was the first time I met Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, and it was the first time I realized some people make a living by making others afraid of them. Karen rolled the window back up. The white SUV pulled away, leaving perfume mixed with the scent of pine resin. I watched until it disappeared around the bend. The wind moved across the fields and refused to let me hide in hesitation. It dragged my anger out of the dark and set it right on my face, forcing me to look straight at it. I had just turned back toward the house when I heard a light knock at the gate. An older man stood there, wearing a faded baseball cap, his eyes curious and uneasy at the same time. He introduced himself as Walt Mercer. He lived on the other side of the pine line. Before I could say much, he let out a sigh, heavy with the weight of someone who had done this too many times. He said, "Welcome to the HOA." He said if I thought what just happened was bad, I should sit down before I heard the rest. We sat on the old wooden steps. Walt told me about violation notices for trash cans being out of line by a few minutes, for a sprinkler hose being visible, for a mailbox paint color that was the wrong shade. Each story was like a small stone thrown into a still pond, sending ripples outward before sinking, leaving behind a slow, aching fatigue. I could feel that his fear was not about the fines themselves. It was about being watched constantly, measured inch by inch, turned into the guilty one on his own front yard. Then Walt mentioned Evelyn Hart. She was 82, a widow. She had lived here for more than 30 years. She had a flower garden out front, not built to match any standard except that it made her feel alive. The HOA said the garden was not approved. Karen said no exceptions. Fines piled on top of fines. A lien was placed on a house that had been paid off for years. In the end, Evelyn sold in silence and moved into a nursing home in the town over the hill. Walt said Karen bought the house through a shell company. Now the house was rented out, the grass cut straight like a ruler, the flowers ripped out as if they had never existed. I stared at the fields as the sunset painted them red. This no longer looked like a funny story people told online. I saw a hunting game wrapped in paperwork. I saw an old woman pushed out of her own life because she would not bend to a list. I asked why nobody stopped Karen. Walt laughed, but there was no joy in it. Whoever speaks up is next. That night I could not sleep. I listened to the wind moving through the pines like the land itself was sighing. I heard the old wooden house creak softly, like it missed my grandfather's hands. I stared at the violation notice on the table, that bright yellow under the lamp, and I wondered how many people had stared at something like this before they finally gave up. I called the family attorney, Graham Weller, the man who handled the will. When I told him about the fine and Karen Whitmore, the line went quiet for a long time. That silence was not confusion. It sounded like someone turning an old page in a file and finding something nobody should have been allowed to forget. Then Graham spoke, slow and clear. "Ethan, you did not just inherit land. You inherited a secret that HOA tried to bury. And if Karen knew what you were holding, she never would have dared tape that notice to your gate." I gripped the phone tighter. In the dark, a very small, very cold smile formed on my mouth. Not because I wanted revenge, because for the first time I understood. I was not the prey. I had just been mistaken for it. I realized I was standing on their entire world after a call that lasted less than 10 minutes. And that meant Karen Whitmore taped that violation notice to my gate, while she knew perfectly well she was standing on a lie. The next morning I drove into town to meet Graham Weller. His office sat on a quiet street, with an old wooden front and windows clouded by the dust of time. Inside, it smelled like yellowed paper and aged pine, the kind of smell that makes you feel every word has to be paid for in truth. Graham was not the kind of lawyer who talked just to fill space. He looked at me like I had just walked into a storm without knowing how hard the wind was about to hit. He set a thick stack of files on the desk, the edges worn like they had been turned over and over for a lifetime. When I sat down, he did not circle around the point. He pulled out an old map and spread it flat, like laying a cloth over a secret. "Ethan," he said, "you own more than you think." I studied the faded ink lines. Graham used the tip of his pen to circle a section of land sitting neatly inside my ranch. That outline matched Ridgecrest Heights perfectly. The spotless roads I had just seen, the green park, the clubhouse, the pool, all of it drawn like an island floating in a sea of my family's land. Graham said that nearly a century ago, my great-grandfather leased that central parcel to a developer under a long-term land lease. Not sold, only leased. The term was 99 years. I heard 99 like a lock snapping shut. I had read plenty about real estate, but I never thought I would put my hand on a legal trap that old. I asked when the lease expired, even though something in me was already turning cold in the way it does when you touch the edge of a hard truth. Graham looked straight at me. "On the 1st of May this year." I swallowed. "And now it was after that." He nodded. "It has passed. Under the terms, all common land, internal roads, the park, the shared facilities, everything reverts to the original owner. That is you." There was no music, no triumphant moment. Only a silence as heavy as stone set down in the middle of the room. I thought of Karen, of the confident look in her eyes when she said the law is the law. I thought of the $500 notice shaking in the wind like a taunt. They did not know, I asked. Graham gave a small laugh with no humor in it. That is the interesting part, he said. I sent notice, complete and legal. Certified letters, 1 year before, 6 months before, and 90 days before the lease expired. Every one of them shows confirmed receipt. I felt a chill run up my spine. Not fear, but the realization of how deliberate this was. If they received the letters and still said nothing to the residents, then someone had decided to keep it secret. And the only person with enough power to do that was the one sitting in the president's chair, signing every email, standing at every meeting like a queen of petty rules. Then why did the buyers not catch it? I asked. Why did they keep selling homes, keep renting them out, keep claiming the HOA owned everything? Graham said because of the system. Most title searches only trace back 40 to 50 years. This lease was signed nearly a century ago. Unless someone demanded a full chain of title search, it would not surface. Karen knew that, and she used it. I closed my eyes for a beat. Evelyn Hart rose in my mind like a thin shadow, an 82-year-old woman clutching a small suitcase as she left her own home. A flower garden ripped out clean and replaced with approved decorative grass. I saw Walt's tired eyes again when he said, "Whoever speaks up is next." Suddenly I understood. This was not just fines, not just annoyance. This was a machine. And Karen was the one at the controls. "What are you going to do?" Graham asked. I opened my eyes. "I do not want to become the enemy of the whole community," I said. "I want peace. I want to talk properly. I want to offer them a new deal, lease it back, or sell the common land outright at a fair value so the residents are not dragged into a war they do not even understand." Graham looked at me for a long time. His eyes softened slightly, like he saw my grandfather's shadow in me. "You think like he did," he said, "but I have to be direct. With someone like Karen, goodwill is often mistaken for weakness." I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the town looked calm, unaware that a legal earthquake was sitting inside a stack of paper on the desk. I said I only wanted to live in peace. Graham said, "Your peace is exactly what threatens her power." We agreed on the first move. Not a fight in the dark, not arguments on the HOA internal forum, but public, transparent, with the county, with the map, with the seal. If Karen wanted to perform, we would give her a stage bright enough for the truth to speak on its own. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. A message from Walt. "Karen is telling everyone you are just an unemployed heir, about to tear this place apart. Be careful." I stared at those words and let out a long breath. I was not angry, and I was not panicked. I just saw more clearly. Karen had started building her story, the one where I was the villain, and she would do anything to keep the residents believing that story. Because if they looked down at the ground beneath their feet, they would see her foundation was nothing but leased land that had already expired. I stepped out into the sunlight, hearing the wind move through the pine line like a push forward. I had been underestimated. Karen thought I would bow my head over a violation notice, but she did not know I was holding the very thing she feared most: paperwork. And the truth. Tomorrow I would stand right in front of the private community sign with the sheriff and the county clerk. If Karen chose confrontation, she would do it in front of everyone. And if she dared call the police to drive me off the road, leading into my land, then the police themselves would witness the moment her mask finally fell. Karen called the police to have me arrested for trespassing the moment I stood under the private community sign. And the cruelest part was the certainty in her voice, as if the law itself were her personal property. That morning the wind blew hard, whipping through the old pines, the leaves hissing like whispers spreading through a small town. I arrived early, my old pickup parked at an angle on the shoulder, road dust caked along the side panels. I did not stand in the middle of the gate. I stood right at the edge of the road, where the shoulder and the drainage ditch ran long, like a thin stitched line on a map. I sipped cold coffee and stared at the wooden sign carved with the words, "Private Community." The way you stare at a claim carved into something that was never theirs. Sheriff Nolan Briggs arrived next. He was broad, but his face held the weary look of a man who had heard too many one-sided stories. He greeted me briefly, then looked toward the gate like he was bracing himself for a performance. Paula Soren, the county clerk, showed up with a thick stack of files. She stepped out with the calm of someone used to working with facts, not with ego. She did not study the sign for long. She looked straight at me, as if asking a question without speaking. "Are you sure you want to open this door?" I nodded. Tires rolled up behind us. Karen Whitmore's white SUV arrived in the exact way she always did. It was spotless and glossy, sitting there like an exclamation mark. Karen stepped out in a fitted business dress, jewelry catching the light. She did not look at Paula. She looked at the sheriff first, because she believed real power lived in a uniform. "Thank you for coming," Karen said. "This man has trespassed on private HOA property. He is filming residents. He is threatening the safety of the community. I want him taken away." I said nothing. I let the silence hold for a beat. Karen hated silence. It broke her control of the rhythm. Sheriff Briggs sighed, then asked what he had probably asked hundreds of times in his life. "Do you have any documentation proving this area is HOA property?" Karen gave a short, sharp laugh. "Are you kidding? This is Ridgecrest Heights. We own the internal roads, the park, the common facilities. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows." That was the line she used to turn words into law. Paula set her stack of files on the hood of the patrol car. The thick paper hit the metal with a heavy, dry sound, like a hammer striking false confidence. She opened the binder and pulled out a survey map stamped with the county seal. It caught the sunlight like something that could not be bent by anyone's voice. "This is the parcel survey for Silver Pine Ranch," Paula said, her tone steady and firm. "The most recent ownership update lists Ethan Caldwell as the title holder." Karen waved a hand. "No one denies he owns the ranch around it. But Ridgecrest Heights is a separate legal entity. We own the core. We manage the core. And I am the president." I watched her. For a moment I saw the truth flash behind her sunglasses, a tiny worry buried deep. Karen knew. She knew there was something in the records. She just did not think I would find it this fast. Paula turned another page. A red outline wrapped the entire community. She pressed the tip of her pen onto the central section like driving a nail into a board. This section was leased under a long-term land lease, signed nearly a century ago. Not sold, only leased. Karen laughed again. "A legal fairy tale. Our attorney will." "That lease has expired," Paula cut in. "On the 1st of May this year." The air froze. The wind still blew. The leaves still hissed. But between us, everything felt locked in place. Karen went still for a beat. Then her lips tightened like someone whose floor had just been yanked out from under her. "That is impossible," Karen said, her voice higher now. "You do not understand. Residents bought homes. They paid fees. They trust us." "Land ownership does not change because of trust," Paula replied. "It changes because of paperwork." Sheriff Briggs turned to Paula, his voice slower. "So, if Mr. Caldwell is standing here, is he trespassing?" Paula shook her head. "Legally, the only person here with absolute rights over this land is Mr. Caldwell." Karen snapped her head toward me. Her eyes flashed with raw anger, like an animal cornered. "What did you do?" she demanded. "You are destroying this community." I straightened up. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Karen lived on volume. I lived on evidence. "I did not come here to destroy anything," I said. "I came here to clarify the boundary. I came here so residents would know the truth. And I came here to say one thing you forgot." I looked straight at her. "Welcome to my ranch." The words fell softly, but I could see how they landed like stone in Karen's chest. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. Then she stepped back once, very small, like someone who had just reached the edge of a cliff. Sheriff Briggs looked at Karen, then at me, his expression a mix of exhaustion and pity. He had seen people like her before, people who turned rules into weapons and called it order. Paula closed the binder and clipped it tight. like shutting a door. I saw her hand tighten slightly, not from fear, but from anger on behalf of residents kept in the dark for far too long. She spoke to me quietly. "You should prepare yourself. Someone like her does not accept losing." Karen turned and walked away fast toward the SUV. Her posture was rigid, like she was holding herself together so she would not break apart. The door slammed. The tires spun, gravel spraying onto the shoulder. When the white SUV disappeared around the bend, the wind seemed to blow harder, and the private community sign trembled slightly, as if it was losing confidence too. I looked down the road into Ridgecrest Heights. In the distance, the rooftop sat quiet behind the pine line, clean, still, completely unaware that the ground beneath them had changed hands on paper a long time ago. Sheriff Briggs spoke in a low voice. "I think she will come back, but not with words." I nodded. I could feel it. Karen would not apologize. Karen would not back down. And when words were not enough to hold power, she would choose another way. I turned back to my truck and walked slowly, listening to gravel crunch under my boots like time counting down. In my mind, I saw Evelyn Hart clutching a small suitcase as she left her home, an 82-year-old woman pushed out by pieces of paper signed by the woman who had just fled. I did not want war, but I could not turn away. Because from today on, if I stayed silent, I would not only abandon my land, I would abandon everyone who had been robbed of their life right on that land. They came at night, carrying bolt cutters and the confidence of people who thought the dark would take their side. And the first thing I heard was not footsteps. It was metal biting into the gate chain, cold as a declaration. I had known Karen would do it sooner or later. Not because I wanted to assume the worst, but because I had seen her eyes when the county clerk said the land belonged to me. That was not the look of someone who had lost. That was the look of someone who had decided she would bend the truth to her will. I did not put up the fence to provoke anyone. I put it up to make things clear. After that meeting at the gate, I spent the entire weekend walking the boundary line, finding my grandfather's old markers and matching them to the county survey. Every step on the soft earth felt like stepping on a promise. I drove steel stakes into the ground and pulled the wire straight, like a sentence that could not be misunderstood. I placed a Silver Pine Ranch sign at the entrance, simple lettering, not threatening, just the real name of this place. The most important part was the road leading into Ridgecrest Heights. According to the map, the road shoulder and the drainage ditch, along with the strips of land on both sides, all belonged to my ranch. I did not block the road. I did not step onto the asphalt. I simply set the boundary where the boundary had always been, long before Karen ever knew what the letters HOA meant. I also installed more solar-powered cameras. One faced straight at the gate. Another looked down the road. My grandfather used to say there are people who only understand when they know they are being watched back. I did not want to turn the ranch into a fortress, but I was not going to let it become prey. That night the wind was strong, making the pines sway like waves. I sat in my grandfather's old armchair, the warm lamplight in the living room falling over the scratches on the armrests, like fingerprints left by time. I ate a cold dinner. I tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting back to the tablet screen on the table. Around 11 at night, headlights appeared at the end of the road, then went dark. A white SUV parked quietly a short distance from the gate. I did not need to look closely to know it was Karen's. She always chose to show up in a way that made people feel violated, then she called it order. Two figures stepped out of the vehicle, big, broad-shouldered, wearing dark jackets. I recognized them. Chad Huxley and Brent Doherty, the two men who usually delivered violation notices with faces like they were carrying out a sacred duty. But tonight they brought something that did not belong to paperwork, a pair of bolt cutters, and an aggression that would later be covered with words. I watched them move toward the gate. They did not knock. They did not call out. They did not ask permission. Brent raised the cutters and tested the loose hanging chain. The sound of metal scraping metal rang out sharp, and it reminded me of a gavel striking in the county hearing, except this sound was not public. It was sneaking. I stood up. I did not rush out like a hothead. I walked out slowly, gravel crunching under my boots, loud enough to make them jerk and turn. Under the thin moonlight I saw Chad narrow his eyes. like he could not believe I dared to come out alone. "Late night gardening?" I asked. Chad curled his lip. He glanced at the camera mounted on the gate post, then looked at me like I did not understand their rules. "You do not have the right to put that here," he said. "This is our community." "No," I said. "This is my ranch. You are just living on it." Karen stepped out of the SUV. She stayed behind them like a director, arms crossed, her voice cutting cold. "You are holding residents hostage. We are here to remove an illegal obstruction." I looked at her, then at the bolt cutters. I did not need a long argument. I spoke each sentence like stamping a seal onto the air. 1. This gate is not locked. 2. You are standing on private property. 3. If anyone uses those cutters on my things, that is vandalism. Karen laughed, thin and sharp. "Do it," she told them, like she was ordering one of her own limbs. In that moment I saw her for what she was. Karen did not believe in the law. Karen believed in the feeling of control. And when control was taken away by paperwork, she tried to take it back with darkness. Brent hesitated. I saw his hand tighten around the cutter handles, then loosen. He glanced at Karen, then at the camera, like a man who had just realized he was standing in the wrong place at the worst possible time. Chad was different. Chad stepped forward, sly and smug, like he was used to watching other people back down. I did not back down. I simply stood there, letting them see I was not the naive heir Karen had painted in the community's mind. I did not need muscles to win. I needed boundaries. I needed evidence. And I needed them to cross the line with their own hands. Finally, Karen muttered a curse, snatched up her phone, and swung it toward us like filming would turn wrong into right. Then she froze when she noticed the tiny red light on my camera blinking steadily like an eye that never blinked. Chad grumbled and pulled Brent back. Brent lowered the cutters for a moment, then lifted them again, like he wanted to erase the trace of what he had done. They retreated to the SUV. Karen did not say anything else. She only looked at me one more time, her gaze sharp as a blade. Then the SUV started, turned, and disappeared into the dark. I stood there long after the taillights were gone. The wind moved through the gate, through the Silver Pine Ranch sign, through the newly placed steel stakes, like it was testing whether I would shake. I did not shake. But something in my chest grew heavier, because I understood tonight was only a greeting. Karen had chosen the path of the dark. And when someone is willing to bring bolt cutters to your gate late at night, tomorrow they will bring something else. I went back inside, turned off more lights, and replayed the footage. The image was clear. The sound was clear. Every step, every word. I stared at the screen, then let out a long breath. On my land, the light is always on, and from this moment on, the truth will not stand alone anymore. The next morning, Karen accused me of assault and trespassing, and she cried right in front of the police as if she were the one being cornered. But what sent a chill up my spine was not the crying, it was how smoothly she lied, like she had practiced it for a long time. The patrol car stopped in front of my porch, while the sunlight was still thin. I stepped out with a hot cup of coffee, and saw Karen standing at the end of the walkway, one hand pressed to her chest, eyes red and watery, lips trembling. She chose the exact image this community was most likely to believe, a fragile woman terrified of a dangerous man who had come back from the city. Sheriff Nolan Briggs got out of the car and looked at me, then at Karen, with the eyes of a man who had heard too many stories told from only one side. He asked briefly what happened last night. Karen cut in before I could speak. He blocked the gate. He threatened HOA personnel. He attacked. I have video. I have witnesses. I want him arrested. She spoke fast and seamless, each sentence like a nail hammered into the picture of me inside other people's minds, and I realized that was Karen's real weapon. Not violation notices, not bylaws, but the story she built, then forced the entire community to live inside. I did not argue. I simply pulled a USB drive from my jacket pocket and placed it in the sheriff's hand, like handing over a key. "This is the gate camera," I said. "It has timestamps. It has audio. It shows everything." Karen froze for a fraction of a beat. But it was enough for me to see the real fear behind the performance. She turned toward me, her eyes sharpening, like she wanted to say I had just ruined her script. Sheriff Briggs held the USB and did not look at Karen right away. He only nodded. "We will review it." Karen switched tactics immediately. She claimed my cameras violated privacy. She said I had set them up as a trap. She said I was provoking them, but her voice had lost its earlier certainty. She was no longer telling a story. She was trying to cover something up. I looked at her and suddenly understood the small plot twist in that moment. Karen did not call the police to find justice. Karen called the police to create a record, a piece of paper, a case number, something she could use to scare residents into believing I was a threat. She wanted to turn her wrongdoing into a fog so people would look at me and never look at the truth under their feet. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Sheriff Briggs called back. His voice was low and decisive. "I watched the footage. You did not commit a crime. The complaint is closed. You were standing on your land, and you did not do what they accused you of." I let out a long breath. But before I could feel any relief, he continued, like he was weighing every word. "I think you should know, Miss. Whitmore is telling residents you are dangerous, that you plan to block the road, charge fees, and tank property values. They are scared." I stared out across the fields. Morning light laid a pale gold over the pine line. Everything looked so peaceful that for a second I almost believed I could live quietly if I stayed silent. Then I remembered Evelyn. Silence was what pushed her out of her home. I thanked the sheriff and ended the call. Less than half an hour later, Walt sent me screenshots from the HOA internal page. A long post in all caps, dripping with fake panic. "The hostile landowner is barricading the community. Stay away. Report any suspicious behavior." I kept scrolling. Emails, forwarded messages. A story repeated again and again, growing wilder with every retelling. They labeled me as everything. A greedy man. A hidden developer. Someone who would open a livestock operation right next to the pool out of spite. Someone who would charge admission at the gate. Someone who would cut off utilities. Each lie was like a thorn raking across the community's skin, hurting them, making them flinch, then making them tell each other that flinching was safety. I realized the scariest thing was not Karen. It was the fear she fed into other people. It made them close curtains in the middle of the day. It made them watch each other through cracks in the door instead of greeting each other out in the yard. It turned neighbors into guards. That afternoon, Walt called. His voice sounded raw. "Ethan," he said, "people are saying the bank just paused refinance paperwork because legal access is now in question. People are starting to panic. They do not know who to believe. And Karen is telling them, you are the reason." I stood in my kitchen, staring at the old violation notice still lying on the table like a stain. I wanted to shout that I had done nothing wrong. Then I understood. If I shouted, I would step onto Karen's stage, and on her stage, I was always the villain. I called Graham. He listened, paused for a beat, then spoke immediately. "We have to change the location. Right now, Karen controls their fear. If we want to win, we have to bring the truth somewhere fear cannot cover it." I asked how. "Into the light," Graham said. "Not an HOA meeting. A community meeting. A neutral place. With official invitations. With maps. With seals. With documentation. And with answers to what they fear most, their property, their access, their home values." That night we drafted the letters. The wording was careful, not threatening, but not vague. The letters went out by certified mail to every address. I knew that when a letter from a law office landed on their kitchen table, it would carry more weight than 10 panicked posts online. Karen reacted immediately. She called for a boycott. She called me a con artist. She said anyone who showed up would be written down, fined, punished, retaliated against. But the seed had been planted, and once people start asking questions, fear is no longer whole. That night I stood on my porch and looked toward the lights of Ridgecrest Heights. I pictured families opening envelopes, reading line by line, looking at each other, whispering. I did not see victory. I saw an opportunity. If they were willing to step out from behind their curtains, the truth would have somewhere to stand. And once the truth stood in the middle of the community, Karen would no longer be able to control it with her voice. The community room was packed so tightly, I could not even see the back row. And the moment Karen walked in, I knew she had already lost, not because I was stronger, but because for the first time she could no longer control their fear. The parking lot blazed under bright lights. Shiny sedans sat beside old pickups, like two worlds forced to share the same table. I stood at the back of the hall, not to hide, but to watch. I learned something back in the city. Whoever stands at center stage is the easiest target to throw stones at. I did not come here to perform. I came here to witness the truth. People filed in with tense shoulders and darting eyes, like they were afraid of being seen doing something wrong. Some glanced at me and quickly looked away. Some looked at me like I was a new lock hanging on their front door. But there were other looks too, tired looks, like they had endured too much for too long and one honest sentence would be enough to make them break down. Walt Mercer sat in the middle rows, his baseball cap resting on his lap, his fingers clasped tight. He said nothing, but I could see his shoulders trembling slightly. He had lived here long enough to know today could be the day everything changed, or the day Karen crushed them one more time. Graham Weller walked in with me. He was not dressed to show off, a dark suit, an old briefcase. But as he moved through the room, people instinctively made space. Not because they feared him, but because they felt something solid, cold, and real approaching, a feeling they had been missing for a long time. Karen appeared right on schedule in her usual way, not early, not late, like someone who always wants to enter when every eye has already turned toward her. She wore her familiar power outfit, her blonde hair neat, her posture straight. But there was one difference, and only someone watching closely would catch it. Her eyes were no longer certain. They swept quickly around the room, searching for allies, searching for faces that would nod out of habit. And for the first time, she could not find enough. A projector switched on. Blue light spilled across the wall, turning the room into a classroom where the final exam was the truth. Graham stepped up to the podium. He did not give a long introduction. He did not tell a personal story. He simply opened his file and set it down, like placing a stone. "Thank you all for coming," Graham said. "I know there are a lot of rumors outside these walls. Tonight, we are going to talk about the truth." I heard a few sharp swallows. I watched a young man holding a baby near the back. His hand gripped the strap of his bag so hard, as if letting go would make the entire life he just bought fall to the floor. Graham clicked a button. On the screen appeared the county survey map, the seal clear, the lines sharp as a blade. He circled the central parcel, where Ridgecrest Heights sat like an island. He spoke about the long-term land lease, about 99 years, about how it expired on the 1st of May, and about how the legal ownership of the internal roads, the park, and the common facilities now belonged to Ethan Caldwell. The room released a wave of murmurs like wind slipping through a cracked door. An older woman raised a hand to cover her mouth. Another man shook his head again and again like he refused to believe it. Karen shot to her feet. "This is a lie," she shouted. "We have attorneys. We own everything. He is trying to destroy this community." Graham did not look at her. He simply clicked again. An email appeared on the screen. The date was clear. The recipient was clear. Karen Whitmore. "This is the notice sent to the HOA board 2 years ago," Graham said. "It warned that the land lease would expire within 24 months. It instructed the board to prepare financially and notify the residents." Karen went rigid. I saw her throat twitch like someone had squeezed it. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she was searching for an explanation strong enough to save her chair. A woman in the middle rows jumped up. Her voice shook, but it was sharp. "We did not know. Why did you not tell us?" Karen turned toward her, her eyes reddening. "I planned to handle it," she said. "I did not want everyone to panic. I did it for the community." Graham clicked again. A reserve fund statement filled the screen. Numbers did not need emotion to be cruel. He pointed to the balance line. After the warning email, the fund held more than $60,000. 1 month later, it was down to $12,000. The room seemed to stop breathing. Then the breath came back as noise. Graham pointed to a large transaction line. A withdrawal labeled special legal expenses, $58,000. Sent to a consulting company. He paused for a beat, letting silence bite into everyone's skin. That company was registered under a relative of Miss Whitmore, and it dissolved 3 months later. That was when everything exploded. A shout rose from the back. "You stole our money!" A man slammed his hand onto a chair. A woman burst into tears. The man holding the baby stepped back, as if the walls might collapse. Karen took one step back, then another. Her face went pale like paint peeling off. I saw her reach behind her, searching for a chair like someone about to fall. Graham was not done. He clicked again. A chain of emails between Karen and a real estate agent appeared. When asked about ownership of the common land, Karen replied that the HOA fully owned it and there were no issues. A young couple sprang to their feet. The wife spoke through a choked voice. "We bought our home based on that assurance. Now the bank has frozen our file. We could lose everything." Karen looked around, searching for supportive eyes. There were none. The people who once feared her now stared at her like something filthy exposed under bright light. Walt stood up. He did not need to shout. His voice was old and rough, but each word landed like a nail. "You did not manage. You planted fear. You turned us into people who watch each other. And you stole Evelyn's home." The name Evelyn cut through the room like a blade. A heavy silence rolled in. I saw a few people lower their heads. I saw Karen blink fast, like she was trying to shove that image out of her mind. Graham ended with 3 options, his voice not loud, but steady as a post. Negotiate a new lease for the common land, buy it back, or do nothing, and face the legal process that would reset access rights within the lawful time frame. Karen sat down, her shoulders sagged. The power that had once filled the room dissolved like smoke. I stayed at the back. I did not say a word. I did not need to. The truth spoke for me. And for the first time, I saw these people look at me not as an enemy. They looked at me like someone holding the key, not a key to lock them in, but a key to open a road they thought had belonged to them for a long time. Karen did not disappear after the meeting. She transformed. And only 3 days later, I realized that when some people lose power, they do not negotiate, they burn the bridge. 3 weeks passed in a false quiet. Ridgecrest Heights no longer had floods of emails, no more posts written in all caps, no more violation notices slapped onto doors like open-handed blows. People started talking to each other face to face, hesitant, like they were relearning a habit that had been forbidden for too long. I saw a few residents step onto their porches for the first time while the sun was still up. A young man walked his child down the street and gave me a tiny nod, as if he was afraid someone might see. An older woman stood at the end of the road with her hand pressed to her chest, eyes wet, then turned away quickly like she was trying to hide what she felt. But that quiet was not peace. It felt like the surface of a lake right before a storm hits. I could sense it in the way the wind moved through the pine line, in the way dogs barked along the road and then suddenly fell silent, in the way Walt Mercer glanced around every time he stepped outside. Walt called me one overcast afternoon. His voice was no longer tired the way it usually was. It had sharpened, like an old soldier hearing unfamiliar footsteps beyond the fence. "Ethan," he said, "Karen is meeting a strange man. A black pickup, big, not like the residents around here. I have seen him 3 times. The last time, she handed him a thick envelope. I went quiet. In my mind, Karen was no longer the unpleasant woman in the meeting room. She was a knife with its blade snapped off, searching for another way to cut. I called Graham. He listened, and his voice slowed. "We do not speculate," he said, "but you need to treat this as a sign. When someone loses the stage, they go looking for the dark." That night I did not sleep. I sat on the farmhouse porch, watching the distant lights of Ridgecrest Heights like fireflies trapped behind a fence. I did not want to be afraid on my own land, but I was not naive. I turned on the cameras, checked the motion lights, kept my phone within reach, not to look for trouble, but so trouble could not find me in silence. On the 3rd night, the camera screen showed a black pickup stopping at the edge of darkness, a short distance from the fence. The headlights went off. The door opened. A figure stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered. standing still like he was listening. I watched him look toward the tool shed and the old hay pile in the distance. Then he pulled something from the truck bed that looked like a fuel can. My blood went cold in a single beat. I did not rush out like in a movie. I did not shout. I did not make myself a target. I backed into the porch shadows, lifted my phone, and called the sheriff directly. I spoke short, clear, and without extra emotion. There is someone near the fence. There is something flammable. The cameras are recording. While I waited, I switched on more yard lights. The beams swept across the grass like a curtain yanked open. The figure out there froze. He did not like light. He liked places where no one could see. He moved toward the fence and searched for a weak point. I did not approach. I kept my distance. I let the cameras do their work. When the patrol sirens sliced through the night, the figure went rigid, then turned. But it was too late. 2 police vehicles rushed in, blue and red lights washing over the pine trunks like blades cutting through darkness. I heard commands. I saw him raise his hands. I saw the fuel can drop to the ground, hitting with a heavy sound that felt like a confession. Sheriff Briggs stepped out and looked at me with an expression that was both cautious and understanding. He did not ask if I was all right. He asked if my cameras got it. I nodded. Yes. The man was handcuffed. His name was Rex Mallory. I had never heard it before, but the way he stood, the way he watched, I knew he was not someone who wandered in by accident. He was someone hired to do a dirty job. The sheriff searched the pickup. He found cash with no paperwork, and a phone with messages hastily deleted. He did not say everything in front of me, but his eyes said enough. Someone paid. Someone pointed out the target. I knew who that someone was. The next morning the news spread like wind. Ridgecrest Heights woke up with a new fear, but this time fear was no longer in Karen's hands. It turned back toward her. Walt called me, his voice shaking with shock and relief at the same time. They arrested Karen, Ethan, 7 in the morning, in front of the neighbors. She was wearing a bathrobe. Bye. I stood out in the field as the sun rose, the fog lifting slowly off the grass tips. I did not feel satisfied. I felt sad. Sad that someone chose fire instead of bowing to the truth. Sad that an entire community had been dragged to the edge just because one person could not let go of a chair. But inside that sadness, something else was growing. A feeling that was steady, deep, and warm. The truth did not only exist on paper. It existed in light, in cameras, in people who were finally willing to stand up straight. I looked toward Ridgecrest Heights. I knew this was not the end. When Karen is cornered, she will scream. And this time, she will scream in a room full of people, where every lie can be cut in half by evidence. Karen screamed in the middle of the county hearing room, and that scream made the whole room go silent as if someone had grabbed it by the throat. She pointed straight at me, like I was the thief, even though on the table in front of the chairperson sat a thick stack of documents proving the person standing in the wrong place had never been me. The hearing took place on a gray morning, the sky hanging low, the fluorescent lights in the county building glaring white and cold, like a knife. The room was packed. Reporters stood tight against the walls, cameras already set up. The residents of Ridgecrest Heights sat upright, but their eyes were not the eyes they had before. No longer the look of people afraid of being fined, but the look of people who had just learned they were deceived and were fighting to stay calm so they would not collapse. I sat in the back row, not because I wanted to hide, but because I did not need to stand at center stage for the truth to be seen. Graham stood up front, his file in hand like a slab of stone. Walt sat a few rows away from me, his hands clasped hard together, his aging face stretched tight as wire. He had endured too much for too long, and today was the first time he dared to believe his voice could carry weight. Karen Whitmore was brought in with her attorney. She was no longer wearing that glossy power outfit. She chose pale clothing, styled her hair differently, kept her eyes red and watery, and held tissues ready in her hand, an image designed to trigger sympathy. If you only glanced, you could easily believe she was the victim of a dirty conspiracy. But the handcuffs from the morning she was arrested still lived in the memory of everyone in the room. The chairperson struck the gavel and called for order. A county representative spoke first, his voice dry, precise, emotionless. He repeated what had already been confirmed in the records. The common land, the internal roads, the parks, and the shared facilities of Ridgecrest Heights sat on property belonging to Silverpine Ranch. The long-term land lease had expired on the 1st of May. Ownership reverted to the lawful owner through the chain of inheritance. No one clapped. No one cheered. There was only the sound of people breathing harder as they realized their lives had been placed on a new foundation, and that truth had been hidden from them for years. Then the public comments began. An older woman stood up first. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. She spoke about the warning email sent to the board long before, about how residents were never informed, about how everyone kept paying fees as usual while the legal clock was counting down. She looked toward Karen and asked one simple question that sliced open the air. "Why did you not tell us?" Karen lowered her head and breathed fast like she was about to cry. Her lawyer shifted, as if he wanted to cut in, but the chairperson raised a hand for silence. Next came a young couple. The husband held their baby, his hand clenched tight like he was trying to keep something from slipping away. The wife spoke about their bank file being frozen, about the fear of losing their home because legal access had been thrown into question. She said they bought the house based on assurances that the HOA owned the common land and the internal roads. Now it felt like they were living inside a home built on a lie. Then Walt stood up. He did not need notes. He only looked straight ahead. "Karen did not just manage badly," he said. "She turned fear into law. She turned neighbors into informants. And she stole Evelyn Hart's home." The name Evelyn dropped into the room like a stone sinking straight into everyone's chest. Some people lowered their heads. Some raised hands to their faces. Karen stared at the floor, as if she looked long enough, she could crawl into it and disappear. The chairperson turned to Karen. "Miss Whitmore," he asked, "did you know the land lease was about to expire?" Her lawyer sprang up, ready to speak for her. The chairperson struck the gavel. "I am asking her, not the attorney." Karen lifted her head. Her eyes were red. Her mouth pressed into a hard line. For a few seconds, she tried to hold the performance together. Then the performance cracked. "It is complicated," she said, her voice rising. "The old board, old paperwork, things that are hard to understand. I was only trying to protect the community." "Did you know?" The chairperson repeated, slow and clear. Karen suddenly exploded. She pointed at me. "He is destroying us. He is greedy. He wants to take everything. You do not understand. If it were not for me, you would have." The gavel pounded again and again. Karen kept screaming. The stage tears were gone. Only raw desperation remained, the desperation of someone being dragged off a chair she had sat in for too long. And inside that screaming, people heard what they needed to hear most. Karen was not talking about the community. Karen was talking about power. Karen spoke as if the residents owed her, as if they existed to serve her chair. The chairperson waited until the room settled. "The county's decision is as follows," he said. "The HOA has 30 days to negotiate in good faith with the landowner to secure legal access and an operational plan for infrastructure. If not, the county will consider terminating public utility use rights on private land within the limits allowed by law." It was the finishing blow. No need for more handcuffs. No need for more shouting. Just a deadline, a seal, and one final sentence. That same afternoon, the petition to remove Karen collected enough signatures. The people who once did not dare open their curtains now stood at the signing table as if they were signing an oath. A special meeting was called. The vote passed almost unanimously. Karen Whitmore was removed. The 2 remaining board members resigned on the spot. 1 week later, the residents voted to dissolve the HOA and replace it with a simple, transparent road maintenance agreement. No more meaningless fines. That night, I stood on the ranch porch and looked toward the lights of Ridgecrest Heights. I did not feel victory. I only felt lighter, as if a burden carried for years had finally been lifted off the back of the entire community. Walt called me, his voice rough but bright. "Ethan," he said. For the first time in years, I saw people talking to each other out in their yards. Not whispering, talking normally, like neighbors. I closed my eyes for a beat and thought of Evelyn. I thought of the wooden house and the flower garden that had been torn out. I knew the hardest part was still ahead, because justice is not only about pulling one person down. Justice is about lifting the people who were pushed down back up. And I had decided that this time the truth would not stop at a hearing room. It would go all the way to the place where it owed an apology. Karen was sentenced in silence. And that silence weighed more than any accusation. When the handcuffs clicked shut, she turned her head, searching the room for a look of salvation. But what she found were faces that were no longer afraid. The trial took place 4 months after the day she was arrested. I arrived early and sat in the very last row, where the cold white lights did not shine directly into my face. I did not come to watch someone fall. I came to make sure this story could not be twisted one more time. Outside, a light rain fell, tapping the courtroom windows like a patient clock, reminding me that time always collects its debts. It just collects them slowly. Karen walked in with her lawyer. Her hair looked rougher, her makeup was thin like a patch over a crack, and her eyes swept the room, searching for the people who used to lower their heads for her. There were none. The residents of Ridgecrest Heights sat up straight, silent, like a group that had just relearned how to breathe. Walt sat near the aisle, both hands resting on his knees, his face set like stone. The young couple sat in front holding their baby, the child asleep, unaware that the adults around him were trying to hold on to a home with the truth. The prosecutor spoke slowly, each sentence drilling in like a bit. Fraud in transactions, embezzlement of funds, conspiracy to hire someone to vandalize and intimidate. Each charge was supported by emails, bank statements, and sworn testimony. Not feelings, not rumors, just red seals and dates that could not be argued away. As the emails were displayed, I saw a few residents lower their heads, not out of shame for Karen, but out of shame for themselves, for having believed her. Then, I saw them lift their heads again. Slowly, firmly, like people who had finally understood that being deceived is not a crime. The crime is staying silent once you know. Rex Mallory was called to testify. He spoke in an even tone, like he was describing a normal job. He explained how Karen approached him, what she instructed, how she paid, what message she wanted sent. When the prosecutor asked what would have happened if I had been near the hayshed that night, he shrugged, his eyes unblinking. She did not care. A sharp breath broke somewhere in the courtroom. I heard the young wife below me make a small choking sound, then force it back down. Walt tightened his hands, veins rising. And Karen sprang to her feet, like a spring compressed for too long. She shouted about conspiracy. She shouted about betrayal. She shouted that I had stolen the community from her hands. The judge struck the gavel, his voice hard as steel. Her lawyer pulled her back into her seat. But by then, the final mask had already fallen. Karen was no longer an HOA president. Karen was simply someone desperate because she had lost her chair and lost control. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, I looked down at my hands. I had thought they would shake, but they did not. They rested still, like the ground beneath my feet, the same ground that had endured every wrong step and remained there anyway, waiting for the day it would be called by its true name. Karen was found guilty on every count. The sentence was read out, each word dropping like stone. Prison time, restitution, payment of Evelyn Hart's care costs for the rest of her life. When the judge spoke Evelyn's name, the entire courtroom seemed to sink into another layer of silence, deeper than the first. As if everyone was thinking of a flower garden that had been ripped out, thinking of an 82-year-old woman leaving her home in silence. The handcuffs clicked shut. Karen turned her head. No one stood up. No one said a word. Justice does not need applause. It only needs to be carried out. But this story did not end in the courtroom. The real ending was always going to be where Karen left the wound. A few weeks later, the court appointed someone to manage Karen's assets. Graham called me, his voice low but lighter. "Ethan," he said, "Evelyn's wooden house has been put up for sale. The money will be transferred directly into her care fund." I drove to the nursing home in the town beyond the hill. No cameras, no press, just a long hallway that smelled of disinfectant and artificial flowers. Evelyn sat near a window, her hands resting on a small potted plant. She stared outside like she was looking toward a place she had left too long ago. When I introduced myself, she only nodded, her calm so steady it hurt. No amount of money could give her back her youth, but it could give her something else. The feeling that she was not wrong, that she was not crazy, that someone had finally listened. I did not say much. I only told her that her home was no longer in the hands of the person who took it, and that the rest of her life would no longer be measured in violation notices. Evelyn sat silent for a long time. Then she let out a breath, light as wind. I kept thinking, she said, that I could die, and no one would ever know what they did to me. I left the nursing home as the sun dropped low. On the drive back, I passed the clubhouse and pool of Ridgecrest Heights, the place that used to be a symbol of exclusion. I decided to buy it back through the proper process, not to own more, but to open it up. I took down the long lists of rules and replaced them with a simple wooden sign. Silver Pine Community Center. Welcome everyone. That 4th of July, we held a barbecue. Kids ran across the grass, laughter breaking out as naturally as water. Walt brought a bowl of potato salad, set it on the table, then looked around like he could not believe he was seeing this scene in the very place that once made him afraid. The young couple brought their baby, and this time they were not watching from behind curtains. They stood out in the open, talking like ordinary neighbors. When the fireworks began, I looked up at the bright sky and thought about my grandfather. He left me more than land. He left me a chance to fix something that had been wrong for too long. I had been underestimated. Karen thought I was just a naive heir who could be fined until he gave up. But my real power was never about being able to lock a gate. My real power was about being able to open it. And this time, the gate opening was not only for a road. It was for a community, to live without fear. If you have ever lived somewhere power was abused, if you have ever dealt with an HOA or a Karen who made life feel suffocating, share your story. I read them all. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand up, and an entire neighborhood will remember what freedom feels like.